The 19th National Congress of the Communist Party of China, the CPC, was a milestone in both party politics and the development of the country. Two highlights were the enshrinement in the party constitution of Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era, and the specification of China's two centenary goals: a moderately prosperous society by 2020, 2021 being the 100th anniversary of the CPC, and a great modern socialist country by 2050, 2049 being the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic of China. In a subtle but significant refinement, the path to mid-century is now set in two stages. In the first stage, from 2020 to 2035, the CPC states it will build on the foundation of the moderately prosperous society so that after 15 years of hard work, the country will basically realize socialist modernization. In the second stage, from 2035 to 2050, the CPC states it will work harder for a further 15 years and develop China into a country that is prosperous, strong, democratic, culturally advanced, harmonious, and beautiful. The CPC's analysis of how to achieve this grand goal centers around what is deemed a new principal contradiction in Chinese society. The concept of contradiction is important, and we need to understand why. Contradiction is a Marxist term expressing a kind of political analysis, dialectical materialism, which identifies dynamic productive forces in society and seeks to resolve these tensions by applying correct political theories. Now, even as China is about to achieve its first centenary goal of becoming a moderately prosperous society by 2020, successfully fulfilling material needs through economic growth, there is growing dissatisfaction with social conditions. New goals are needed. So what is this principal contradiction for China's new era that will set China's new goals and drive government policy? This gets us closer to China. I thoroughly enjoyed listening to General Secretary Xi's political report at the opening session of the 19th CPC National Congress. It was so rich with detail. But what I would like to understand is, what are the innovations in it from your point of view as a theorist, especially looking to the future?
General Secretary Xi's report at the 19th CPC Congress is very comprehensive in meaning. I paid much attention to Xi Jinping's thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. The ideas and theories were summarized very authoritatively at the 19th Congress. I think it wields long-term significance in guiding the development of the CPC and the country.
Socialism with Chinese characteristics we've heard about for a long time. And so what is the Xi Jinping thought about that that's new? And then we have this other element for a new era. So I'd like to understand those differences compared to the traditional socialism with Chinese characteristics.
It's been decades since the CPC bannered socialism with Chinese characteristics. This time, the eye-catching part is the inclusion of new era in terminology, so that we have socialism with Chinese characteristics for new era. I think the reason Xi Jinping made such an important judgment is China's transformative development since the period of reform and opening up. For instance, China's comprehensive national strength has been remarkably enhanced, and Chinese people's living standards tremendously improved. Before the period of reform and opening up, there were a lot of people who cannot even feed and clothe themselves. The situation is totally different today. I believe these remarkable changes, which have been sustained over the last 5 years, as General Secretary Xi just stated, that we are in a new era for the development of socialism with Chinese characteristics.
China's development has entered a new era. China has undergone tremendous transformation. It has stood up, grown rich, and become strong. Now, in the new era, China faces multiple complex challenges at home and abroad, and so the principal contradiction facing Chinese society has evolved.
What we now face is a contradiction between imbalanced and inadequate development and the people's ever-growing needs for a better life.
The new principal contradiction, a new way of thinking, a turning point for Chinese society. As an economist, when you first heard about the new principal contradiction in Chinese society at the 19th CPC National Congress, what was your first reaction?
I think it is based on sound judgment about the current stage of the development of China. Because indeed, the situation now is very much different from that China started the economic reform. That is almost 40 years ago. Right? At that time, we could characterize a shortage economy, and the scarcity and the poverty that was prevailing in many places in China. But currently, as we see, after that record-breaking economic growth in the past almost 40 years, China has reached a certain level of prosperity. That's why the shortage issue has been solved. Rather, there were abundant supply of the necessities, right? The food and the clothing and basically housing. That problem has been solved. Right? Essentially, most essential need for the society has been met, right? By the, of course, efforts, right? By the policy incentives in the past 40-some years. But you know that's why people's expectation continue to rise. Indeed, the rising expectation for better lives and must be met with increasingly sophisticated right, goods and services. That is what is we call it goals of the new era.
Give a little bit of a sense of how President Xi has been able to accomplish so much transformative economics in such a short time.
The great achievements of the past 5 years can be attributed mainly to reform. Structural adjustments and transformations and industrial upgrading all need a driving force of reforms. The decisions made at the third plenum of the 18th Party Congress reflect many of President Xi Jinping's reform and opening up measures. In the session, more than 200 reforms were proposed. They cover 6 areas, the economy being the main one. Over the past 5 years, economic institutional reform has been an important priority. But we also pursued reforms involving political, cultural, social, and eco-civilizational institutions, as well as party building. We want our reform to be systemic, integrated, and fully coordinated.
What are the primary principles of President Xi's approach to economics, particularly macroeconomics? What are the underlying theories that distinguish President Xi's idea to the economy?
General Secretary Xi Jinping has implemented a series of new economic strategies and policies. I think the core of them can be summarized as transformation and upgrading. That means there are a series of major decisions on the transformation and upgrading of the national economy.
How does that principal contradiction work, and how would you compare it to the principal contradictions that existed prior? Because we're saying this is a new era, that's the concept, and we have a new principal contradiction. So how does this one differ from what it was before?
The old one is the contradiction in the sense of the production level. We have a Marxist system called productivity. It's a different sense of productivity from the Western economics, and the productivity level is not good enough. It's not up to the same standard as in Western industrialized countries, and that was the old contradiction. But now he is saying that we have caught up with that. China is the world's manufacturing factory, right? I'm pretty sure you travel extensively around the world. So do I. I've been to North America, Europe. And if you look at the standards of living from a materialistic sense perspective, not much of a difference, right? I mean, here a lot of people have cars. Car penetration in this city is 70%, right? Our shelter is pretty decent. People live in air-conditioned units. Most people live in 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom kind of condos here. It's very comparable to the lifestyle in Europe. Maybe a little bit different from the United States because they have single-family houses there. It's more spread out in suburban kind of a living. But other than that, it's very comparable. Very comparable. So I think he's saying that from that perspective, we've already reached that level, right? But as I said, we are still deficient in other aspects, especially I think environmental protection and social justice, cultural development. These aspects we still have a lot of room to improve. Basically, he's saying.
In Deng Xiaoping's era, the principal contradiction was the ever-growing material and cultural needs of the people versus backward social production. It was a welcome change from the prior contradiction during Mao Zedong's era of proletariat versus bourgeois, which catalyzed severe, widespread, and prolonged chaos during the political mass movements, especially the ruinous Cultural Revolution. Now, in Xi Jinping's new era, the principal contradiction is between unbalanced and inadequate development and the people's ever-growing needs for a better life. The foundation of China's new principal contradiction lies in the unbalanced and inadequate relationship between the supply side of the country's productive forces and the demand side of the people's needs. In the early days of the People's Republic of China, it was a central task to restore the national economy and to provide for the basic necessities of life, especially food. Today, China has raised the people's livelihood from bare sustenance to almost moderately prosperous. China's annual per capita nominal GDP jumped to about 54,000 yuan in 2016, from 150 in 1955 and 463 yuan in 1980, an increase of over 100 times. Moreover, Engel's coefficient in China, the proportion of income spent on food, has continued to decline, falling to 30% in 2016, nearly the standard of affluent. In order to establish a moderately prosperous society in all respects, the pursuit of higher-level development and a better life naturally become the people's new expectations. Thus, the new principal contradiction came into being. Take these two words that are used, imbalanced and inadequate. That's the key words in the new principal contradiction. That the productive forces are imbalanced and inadequate to meet the people's needs. So, what does each of those two words mean?
That is an imbalance insufficient, right? Actually, there can be several dimensions. Yeah. China is, by and large, is a developing country. In a sense, in the major cities, then first-tier, second-tier cities, the living standard not only reflects income, but healthcare and other things that's already rich. But on the other hand, there are other regions, lesser developed regions, that is one of the imbalance, the regional imbalance, because given the vast land of China, given the different level of economic development, given the different level of infrastructure, right, creates a regional imbalance. But moreover, even within urban areas, even within the rural areas, the income gap, right, is also a major issue that need to be tackled. Right? Haves and haves not, right? The gap, this now need to be addressed.
The disparity between the people's expectations for a better life and what society and its productive forces can deliver is the new contradiction in China, but that's not so terribly different than what we find in other developed countries as well. People's expectations are always higher. But the claim is made in China that the Chinese system, socialism with Chinese characteristics, can better address this kind of question, this mismatch between people's expectations and what can society deliver, than other forms of government. What's the thinking behind that, and what's the justification?
The economic development in the past, right? China, first of all, take a gradualism. And for instance, in early times, that's why it's related to inadequate and imbalanced. Allow some regions to develop first.
Sure.
Let some people to get rich first. The purpose is to raise overall level of economic development, to increase everybody's well-being. That in some other political arrangement, it's very difficult to do. In a sense, nobody wanted to be developed later, right? Nobody wants to get rich later. Why you do this? So some of my interpretation, the Chinese culture, Chinese way of thinking, it actually we call Chinese characteristics.
So what I'm trying to understand is how the setting of this new principal contradiction kind of gives an overall impetus or power to deal with these type subjects because of the nature of the system, socialism with Chinese characteristics based on Marxism. With this coming out of Marxism, how does it work where that drives specific policies differently than under the old contradiction?
Yeah, I think the big difference is that there are priorities. In other words, previously, China is keen on development at whatever cost it is. You know, for example, environmental issues. You know, we just bypass these things, and we want to reach double-digit GDP growth at any cost, basically, right? Now he's saying we are looking for a different development path. You know, we are looking at not just the numbers, but we also look at the quality of this. What do we mean by quality? All these things we've just discussed that come with it, right? So I think the growth strategy is a little bit different now. It is emphasizing what's called a quality growth in terms of bringing sort of happiness to people in all other aspects as well.
With this new contradiction driving these new policies, is there a distinction between how this works in China because you have this principal contradiction based on Marxism than how these topics would be dealt with in other countries where the economy is so-called mixed between government and private enterprise?
In China, we have a mixed economy. We still have a very large state sector. The official statistics, which is the size of the state sector, is not quite known and also hotly debated. But I think, according to my view, it's very, very large. One time I did an exercise of adding up all the revenues of the top companies, the SOE companies, in the top 500 largest companies in China, and compare that number with the GDP. It's something like 60-some%. So we still have a very large state sector here in China, and we have 120-some central government-controlled SOEs, and also hundreds and thousands of those small SOEs controlled by the provincial level and township level. Yeah, we have a very large state sector, and I think the growth strategy here has been proposing is that yes, we have sort of a market economy, the socialist market with Chinese characteristics. What does that mean? That means that we're not shy about growing those very large SOEs, okay? So it's a growth strategy by those very large companies. And I think the government is not timid about, supporting these companies, timid about letting these companies grow. That indicates a lot about the future direction of this country, in my opinion.
After 1949, state-owned enterprises gradually undertook all the nation-building tasks, and they provided the livelihoods for many workers. But their bloated inefficiencies led to economic stagnation. Since China began its reform and opening up in 1978, rounds of SOE reforms have increasingly opened up more industrial sectors to competition from non-state enterprises, and the relative economic weight of the state sector declined substantially. Just describe a little bit of the whole situation with state-owned enterprises, what the issue is in terms of why they need reform, and then the difficulty in effecting those reforms.
我给你举个例子了，我们的石化行业
Let me give you an example. We can compare the petrochemical industry and the steel industry as they are both raw material industries. The steel industry opened up quite early to the private sector, which led to sufficient competition. Now SOEs contribute to 50% of the output in the steel industry, and private ones also contribute to 50%. The fierce competition pressures SOEs into improving management, reducing cost, and becoming more competitive. Now China's steel output accounts for over 50% of the world's total and is unrivaled. Many countries are suing us, claiming that our steel price is too low. Why is it too low? The entry of the private sector has made China's steel industry more competitive. However, the petrochemical industry is completely different. Every year we spend $200 billion on importing oil and $200 billion on importing petrochemical products, or a total of $400 billion. Why? We have no competitive edge and rely heavily on imports. This is caused by monopolies. China's oil price is double that of the U.S. We are not competitive enough to export oil. Instead, we rely heavily on imports. This is because of the formation of interest groups that allows a small number of people to control the industry. This, again, can be attributed to our failure to reform. It was recently revealed that some cases in the petrochemical industry happened because of moves taken by vested interests. Without reform, the prospect is hopeless. Now we are promoting mixed ownership and building a modern corporate system. Private enterprises are allowed to enter and employees can hold shares. This move will really engage SOEs in market competition. Only under the firm leadership of Xi can we break the barriers caused by vested interests, eliminate the resistance against reform, and truly carry through the reform of SOEs.
In China, enterprises involved in undertakings of public welfare such as coal, electricity, tap water and public transportation are state-owned. China's state-owned enterprises fall into two categories. One serves public welfare and the other is market-based. The market-based SOEs can be subdivided into two types. One runs natural monopolies and the other competes in the market. This time they undergo renationalization again, undertaking the difficult tasks of fulfilling some national functions. These renationalized enterprises then cannot pretend to be enterprises that compete in the market. This is not easy. As for remarketization, our enterprises must act like enterprises for that purpose. Now our SOEs do not act like enterprises. Why is that? The line between the government and enterprises is blurred. To take central enterprises, for example, are they enterprises or government agencies? Sometimes you cannot tell. This was fine in the past. Now Chinese enterprises are going global. If they are involved in lawsuits overseas, who should represent them in court? The secretary of the party, the legal representative, or the chairman of the board? This allows for no ambiguity. Thus, there must be a clear line between enterprises and government. They should be separated from each other. In this phase, although the government and enterprises are separated from each other, the reform of the corporate system is not over yet. The corporate system, formed in the first half of the 20th century, includes limited liability enterprises. This system is universally applied worldwide. China's market economy is not different from the rest of the world. The market economy is the same everywhere. Thus, the corporate system in the market economy should also be the same everywhere.
What is the process by which President Xi has overcome some of these interest groups? In general terms, interest groups are very powerful. They control very large assets, one of which you described in petrochemicals. So what is the process for even a leader of the country to deal with such an embedded structure?
The reform needs to be pushed forward steadily because SOEs, central enterprises in particular, are very powerful in their industry. To advance our reform, it has to be done in the steadiest manner possible. We cannot adopt shock therapy like the former Soviet Union did. That would harm productivity. That's why we're starting the reform of central enterprises on a pilot basis. The pilot is China Unicom, a mobile communication enterprise. The reform of China Unicom, if successful, will be extended to all central enterprises. The overall principles guiding reform are stability and prudence. In the course of the reform, we still need to grow our economy and refrain from causing production fluctuations. We are doing a good job in this regard.
Some foreign analysts would see those as somewhat contradictory, where the market is playing a decisive role, yet the government continues to play a dominant role. How does China articulate those two concepts, and why are they not contradictions?
In the 5 years since we proposed the decisive role of the market in resource allocation, the scope of things priced by the government has shrunk. In addition, all kinds of factors of production can flow freely on a larger scale in the market. Thus, the market optimizes resource allocation. Now, we define the role of the government as exercising macro regulation and control, supervising the market, enforcing unified coordination, and implementing unified foreign-related policies, such as import and export rules. These functions, just like the function of the market in deciding resource allocation, are indispensable.
The most critical point is that the government must step up to address problems caused by the development of the market economy, including environmental ones. Another such problem is fiscal transfer payment. If the market economy is allowed to develop on its own, then the most economically advanced area of the whole country is the coastal area. Then what about the Heshi corridor? What about the impoverished areas? All these problems need the government to step forward. Plus, in a market economy, people seeking profits would thus flock to profitable industries. Once these industries reach a certain phase, there will be overcapacity, which will lead to excesses in the real economy and cause a crisis. Finance will surely be troubled as well. In that case, when a crisis breaks out and many workers lose their jobs, what can be done?
President Xi Jinping has set two overarching strategies to guide China's economic development and to increase the quality of life of the Chinese people. The first is the 5 major development concepts: innovation, coordination, green, open, and shared, which focus on optimizing the domestic economy such that GDP growth is only one of several critical success factors, including reduction in social imbalances, elimination of extreme poverty, clean environment, quality health care, and indigenous innovation in science and technology. Xi's second strategy is the Belt and Road Initiative, which promotes international economic development, especially infrastructure in the developing world, thereby benefiting China's economy in various ways, such as overseas construction projects, access to natural resources, energy, diversification of trade, and building China's less developed provinces. In addition, supply-side structural reform seeks to reduce industrial overcapacities in basic industries and to decrease corporate debt. There are major challenges, of course, including high expectations of the Chinese people and the country's dependency on world stability and economic health. The significance of Xi's economics depends on China's continuing development and prosperity, the Chinese people's sense of well-being, and China's contributions to the world economy. That's closer to China.